The fact that John
Hello,
had died
everyone.
was not news to the villagers of
I'm
Barrow,
glad to
because
see
in
you on
recent
my
years
channel.
everyone wondered
The
how
story I'm
John,
going to tell
with
you
all his
today is
ailments and his
pure.
age, which had
It
already
is
passed
true
his
that
ninth
all the
decade,
bad things that
could
happen in
continue
life
to walk in
happen
the
for a
village.
reason.
But no one
It is
rejoiced
said
at
that we
John's
can
death,
appreciate the
and there
good
were no
things,
indifferent
the
people,
things when they
because
happen
John
to
was
us.
known as an odd old man,
I hope
but
you enjoy
soulful,
this
with
story.
humor and great life
I
wisdom.
wish you a pleasant viewing
He appeared in Barrow
experience.
in the early 90s, and having bought a vacant house in the middle of nowhere, in fact even some distance from the village, he announced to everyone that he was going to farm. They waved their hands at him. However, what kind of farming is there? Who are you going to sell these potatoes and other bits of the vegetable garden to? But John was a man with ingenuity in addition to his weirdness, and soon, having made greenhouses with his own hands, he began to manage, and somehow things went afield for him. It turned out that despite the difficult, ambiguous time in the city where John traveled with goods, there were hunters, that is, buyers for what he could offer. It would seem, who would be surprised by garden strawberries? But John offered strawberries of white color and yellow, and even some strange berries, clearly of overseas origin. And it turned out that all sorts of newly created rich people with great pleasure ready to buy up such a thing. In general, John didn't talk much about his business, but in the village there was no way to hide anything from the public, and they saw him at the market in the city. People shook their heads. John was a quick John, lucky, but what berry is there in winter? But it turned out that by the winter John had managed to build an annex to the house, like an additional kitchen, and even with his own hands assembled a smokehouse and began to cook fish there. He bought the catch from local men and smoked it according to special recipes to make a delicacy, again for sale in the city. And in the spring John bought the land from the former state farm and planted all the carrots, beets, and some other vegetables, found someone to sell to in town. Berries again began to grow more according to science, and not only his own forces built greenhouses, hired workers, so he became a farmer. In general, the locals at first looked at him obliquely simply because of the social difference, because, well, the smartest one. But then John gained everyone's respect. First of all, he helped the villagers. He could easily borrow money from him in hard times. However, John had X-ray vision and never gave money to anyone who wanted money for a bottle. Secondly, he helped the local school with repairs and also cleared the local pond, which turned from a puddle into a small, pretty lake on the shore of which you could now have a picnic and sunbathe. No one knew exactly how much John had from his farming, but they guessed that it was a lot. However, no one could understand what he actually spent the money on. In general, at first he spent decently, and it was clear that he restored the house, which had 2 floors and which, as they used to say, was built in the middle of the last century, so that here for civilized, so to speak, rest could come big people from the city. But since the middle of the 80s the house had been abandoned, and by the 90s it was in a sad state. John took care to make it look decent again, but people could only see how he decided to do everything outside, and few people knew what was inside, because John did not like to receive guests. John drove an ordinary Volga as long as he could drive. He dressed simply, and even so that if they did not know who he was, one would think that he was a poor man. It was also known to everyone that John was lonely, and there were a lot of versions about it. Some said that John orphanage, others assured that the matter here, of course, in conflict with the family, maybe even involved in it some unhappy love. In short, everyone could only speculate why he was such a loner. So John lived quietly. He conducted his own affairs, and then he died. The doctor said it was an easy death, just a heart failure in his sleep. So what do we do now? Leslie asked. She was John's closest neighbor and knew him a little better than anyone else, because in recent years, as a single mother with 2 girls aged 6 and 12, she survived by working part-time for a hermit farmer, going to his house 2 or 3 times a week to clean and cook. And naturally, everyone was curious about the private life of a non-human. On this occasion, Leslie and a fellow from the village, Carlo, had a conversation. It was a couple months before John passed away, by the way. "He's like Baba Yaga's hut there," Leslie's youngest daughter Emma once said when they talked about the neighbor. Her mother gave her a light, almost caressing slap on the back for pedagogical purposes and told her not to talk nonsense or she'd be banned for reading bedtime storybooks. It's just an ordinary house. Imagine, even no expensive appliances. The refrigerator is Burjusa. The oven, well, the stove is ordinary. In general, everything is simple. Well, what do you want? She waved her hands, meaning, by the way, millionaires, and even billionaires live modestly. Here, I saw that even on the subway can ride the subway and walk in torn socks. Why did they earn money? Asked Carlo. Well, maybe he spends it on charity, suggested Selena, Leslie's eldest daughter. He likes to say that good must necessarily win. What does he mean by that? Carlo didn't understand. How should I know? Selena shrugged her shoulders. Sometimes he thinks about it and mutters to himself. In a word, a nutcase. Carlo summed it up. But I'm curious, where does he put his money? Probably saving up. I've heard of pathological hoarding. Carlo was not well liked in the village because he was the kind of guy who came to visit and every time asked to be fed. He was also the kind of guy who could work but didn't like it and was lazy. Though talented, and he was also a joker with a tendency to dream, but never finished any of his ideas. Disliked Carlo, but considered his character oversaw harmless because he did not drink in his life, because he was allergic to alcohol. They also felt a little sorry for Carlo because he was raised by a father who was a bitter drunk. Carlo's mother died from drinking bad alcohol when the son was 4 years old, and then the boy was orphaned. His father died from the same alcohol, but not directly, just fell asleep in a snowdrift. It happened that year, in the spring of which Carlo was scheduled to graduate. It was only by some miracle that he did not fail at them, and now he intended to go to the city to learn, to become a sushi chef, a car mechanic, a builder. Carlo himself had not yet decided, and for this inarticulate character he was expected to be unemployed and eventually a village fool. But Carlo was not offended and could skillfully defend himself, putting the interlocutor in his place by giving the example of all sorts of great people who achieved something only after 40 years so. However, still no one wanted to take Carlo seriously. Naturally, John's death promised to create a lot of problems, in the sense that it was all interesting and unclear and what will happen to all of his property. And then suddenly it turned out that on his bed under the pillow old man kept an envelope on which was written, "To open in case of my death." The doctor opened the envelope, then looked around at the villagers who had dropped by the house as neighbors, attracted by such news as the appearance of an ambulance in John's yard. "There's this," said the doctor. "A will?" Harvey asked. "No. It's an appeal to all the people of Barrow Village. I've come across this before." The doctor waved his hand. "I've never come across it before." "Well, read it then, please," Harvey exclaimed. "Me?" The doctor rounded his eyes. "You're the only official person here." Harvey scratched the back of his head. "How did you even get in here?" The doctor opened and closed his mouth. "I called it a U-dope," Leslie sobbed. "I looked in on John, and we agreed that I'd clean the windows today. And, oh, woe is me, I was going to make soup today, with brisket, as he liked it," and the woman cried. "Please pull yourself together," the doctor tried to cheer her up. "Any relatives of the deceased?" "No," Leslie blew noisily into her handkerchief. "There was one. You see, it's in the letter. Anyway, you better do it," and he held out the letter to her. Leslie took the envelope, tore it open, and pulled out a notebook, written in John's handwriting. She began to read loudly, without hurry, and clearly so that everyone could understand. It turned out that John had made a will, which was kept at such and such a notary. He specified his name and address. He specified that he wanted his property to go to a particular person in the village, and that it was. "Oh," Leslie hiccuped, began to settle on the wall, and did not fall down only because she was picked up by Harvey. "It says that he gives me the land, and the equipment and the house. Everything for farming." "Oh my God! Oh, fats! Oh!" Just in time, an angry hiss behind her, but Leslie didn't notice it. In general, there were quite a lot of people stopping by the neighbor's place. Not because deaths were rare in Barrow, no. Here these sad cases happened according to the statistics common for villages and towns. The fact was that John was a very attractive person. The envious phrase was Maria's. This 45-year-old woman had not the best reputation in Barrow, because she drank so much that she could not see the white selenium, and she took men to her, so to speak, looking for a husband and changing them too often than it would be decent, even for the most desperate single woman. Maria had long ago not worked anywhere. She was fed and mostly drunk by her roommates. At the moment her date was Frederick, a former sawmill worker, fired for absenteeism and attempted theft. These characters were disliked in the village so much that they were not even allowed to borrow anything from the store, and they had to go to the neighboring village for whitewater, yellow beer, and snacks. The saleswoman told them as soon as you come for normal products and not bloody liquor, so I'll start serving you. What do you want here? One of the neighbors pushed Maria out of the crowd of villagers. Go on. John wouldn't want you at his funeral. You're a disgrace to Barrow. So, you're the Harris. The doctor sighed. Will you take charge of the funeral? Of course I will, Leslie nodded. We'll do it properly. Poor John. All alone. And how? Why? Why should I? Why should I? The woman repeated in shock. I never thought of it. I was just helping. Okay, citizens. The doctor shook his head. Who has nothing to do with all this? In general, you would not crowd. Now we need to take it out and take it to, well, you know. Once John was in the village cemetery, the villagers piled the place of his repose with flowers. Almost everyone came. Except, as they said, the soulless ones like Maria. On the day when they said goodbye to John, the weather was such that one could think that late fall decided to turn back and gave way to summer. The sun was warming. The wind was rustling quietly in the crowns of trees. At the spontaneous farewell ceremony at the Pogos, everyone had something good to say about John. They remembered his eccentricities. Do you remember what he did on Ivan about 10 years ago? Steve turned to those who had come to the wake. Steve was one of the country laborers who had been working for John all those years. Steve appreciated his bosses because John paid his workers generously, so generously that you could feed your whole family and still have some left over. In general, as Steve thought, you could not be surprised that the old man did not have riches, so paid his salary. And even if there was a reason, let's say a person went on sick leave, he always financially supported. And no one took it as a handout. No. They knew that the farmer did it out of the goodness of his heart if a person had problems. I remember. Pulled his hand up. He was a schoolboy, Harvey. We used to go to the river then. We listened to my grandmother's tales. She was still alive then. Anyway, we heard tales that the mill there in the old days was cursed and mermaids were there, coming out and catching people at night. Oh, we had a lot of fear. I didn't care about fairy tales then, Steve grinned. I'd already settled here. I remember a neighbor knocked on my door. There was one, Catherine, remember? Well, she went to the city and became a teacher. All those standing around nodded, and Steve continued. I remember she knocked on my window and told me that she had a daughter, Lizonka. She was about 9 years old at the time. She, the fool, ran away to the dam. I was afraid she drowned too. But when John appeared, many of the villagers remembered this story. The kids made a fire on the shore and started scaring each other with tales of evil. And then someone suggested to call the waterman himself. In general, crowded on the shore and began to howl, calling, throwing into the water caramels with taffy to lure the evil. And then suddenly the bushes rustled, crackled, and children rushed scattered thought. Mermaids on their souls came. But it was John who chased the kids away from the river, waving nettle bunches. He drove them all the way to the village, and there the young mermaid seekers rushed to their yards. And no one scolded John for such a performance, because it was even good for the children, and then the children were peaceful. Not forever, of course, because children tend to forget things quickly. Yes, the old man was strange, Steve sighed, but he was a good man. Let's remember him. The next day, Leslie went to John's house. She had to clean it up, sort things out. Then, during the week, she was going to go to the notary to start formalizing the inheritance properly. She still couldn't believe she was so rich. And she was a little afraid because Leslie had never been in any business and did not know how to approach farming. Therefore, although she knew that 6 months would have to pass before she could dispose of everything, but she thought in advance that perhaps she should sell it all to some real businessman, and there already, put the proceeds, of course, in the bank and on interest, and taking slowly, daughters to raise, to learn to raise, so that there was a start in light for her beloved Emma and Selena. To make things go faster, Leslie asked to help Harvey and also called Steve. The latter agreed willingly at home. Steve lately tried not to be at all, and it was about his wife. The man had married for love, but then it turned out that they did not suit each other. He would have divorced long ago, but his son Grishka was born, and now, of course, it was impossible to think about it. So Steve tried to pretend that he has a family, everything is normal, but sometimes it did not work. Mom, I will not do anything. Pouting her lips and folding her arms across her chest, stubbornly declared the eldest daughter, when Leslie said that she too would participate in the sorting out of things in John's house. And you have no right to force me. You're so mean, Leslie told her. Well, If that's the case, go home. Wait, she added in a slight tone before her daughter could gallop away happily. Do your homework, wash the dishes, and sweep the floor. By the way, I have to peel potatoes for dinner. Well, Mom, Selena rolled her eyes. Don't mind me here, her parent wagged her finger at her. I won't let you do nothing, you lazy girl. In general, when Leslie went to John's house to work part-time, she usually left her daughters at home. But sometimes she took them with her and they would sit quietly somewhere in a corner, the older one with her smartphone, the younger one with a book, while Leslie was doing chores. Mom, can I help? Emma was jumping around like a little goat. This little girl was always happy to help, and Leslie encouraged such enthusiasm in every possible way, hoping that Emma would grow up to be a good hostess. May I, my sunshine, my clear star? She stroked her daughter's head. What a clever girl she's growing up to be. You see the shelf with the books on it. You take off one by one and put them on 2 stacks, understand? My daughter nodded. Put children's books where you see pictures in one and all the other books in the other. We'll take them to our village library later. John would like his things to continue to serve people. When are we going to dismantle Baba Yaga's hut? Can I help there too? Daughter? Leslie splashed her hands. Well, what are you saying? I do not understand. Where did you get this from? Where do you see a hut here? There. And the child pointed with her pen at one of the walls of the house. But there was no door there, just a wall. Next to the wall was a huge antique chest of drawers. You're confused, Star, Leslie said affectionately, but she had goosebumps running down her spine. Because one day, once she was working in the yard, she had to weed a small flower bed and take care of the plants. Then Leslie remembered that she'd forgotten to ask John what kind of fertilizer he gave the flowers, so she went back to the house. She entered the room and found John moving the dresser for some reason. The old man turned around sharply and his eyes were. For some reason he looked angry, wild, frightened. But it lasted only a few moments, and then he was as friendly and sweet as ever. Leslie decided that in general that all seemed to her. Well, why did the man move the dresser? And the look. So he was probably scared that she crept up unnoticed. And now my daughter was saying that there was another room behind the wall. So there must be a door. And where is it? Where is it hidden? Leslie did not like the way of thinking. There is. Emma exclaimed stubbornly. Remember the pies you made for Grandpa? With cabbage, onions. You told me to stay out of the way and I left. Leslie remembered something like that. I thought you were playing in the yard. I was walking around the house first, the girl said. I came here and there was a door. Open. The door is small. It was made for a baby. I looked inside. And there, apparently invisible and all scary. Emma waved her hands. Steve, who had hitherto been wrapping the dishes from the sideboard with newspapers and stacking their boxes neatly, was distracted from his occupation. Carlo, who, coughing from the dust, was stacking old tulips, had also turned all ears. Leslie felt cold goosebumps dancing anxiously down her back. What is it, daughter? Knives, Emma answered. Paintings, the queen in paintings. Old books. Daughter, what are you talking about? What knives? Leslie, whose lips were already trembling, grabbed Emma by the shoulders and looked into her eyes, trying to figure out if the little girl was just fantasizing. The grass is dry. The cauldron, like Baba Yaga's. Mom, I'm not lying. I'm honestly honest. And then what happened? Was Grandpa Harry there? Yeah, the little girl nodded. He saw me, took me out of there, and told me not to tell anyone about it. And that was it. And then we went to eat pies, Emma smiling and chattering her legs like nothing had happened. Wow, that's all Carlo could say. Let's check it out. With these words, the guy rushed to the chest of drawers. It's heavy. Steve, help. The men pushed on, and the dresser went sideways with a nasty rattle of legs on the floor. And there was a door behind it. A small child could pass through, but an adult would have to duck. There was a lock on the door. The key must be in his thing somewhere, Steve said. We'll have to find it. Why? We can just do that, Harvey said cheerfully, as if he had been waiting for this dark adventure, and in a couple of minutes Carlo came back with a tool for fixing things, which John kept in a drawer in the hallway, and ripped the lock off. Need a flashlight, he added, lingering. There's one on the phone, Steve said. Maybe we shouldn't, Leslie squeaked. Why not? That old man bequeathed everything to you, the house too, and therefore everything in it too. Even your kid's been there, Carlos said. He pushed the door in with determination. Honey, stay here. Mommy's coming, Leslie said to her daughter, and Emma obeyed, but pouted like an older sister. The room behind the wall was quite narrow, and both walls could be touched if you spread your arms. But it was quite long, for it stretched along the whole side wall of the house. Leslie peered fearfully over the men's shoulders. Just what she needed was for Harry's grandfather to turn out to be some kind of maniac. She had heard of such cases. When a person lived, seemingly ordinary, who could be even an exemplary family man, and then suddenly discovered such a thing, it was hair-raising. So all this time she's been helping out, cooking and cleaning, to a madman? How horrible! And she often took her daughters with her. No, Leslie couldn't blame herself for that now. And when she worked part-time in the store, she also took her girls with her. Only sometimes she left the younger one in the care of the older one. And so, what's wrong if the children are with their mother all day long? It makes her feel better. Emma has more fun, and you can see that the older one is not doing silly things, for example, not playing on the phone, but at least sometimes also read a book. Wow, exclaimed Steve, who was walking ahead of everyone. This is it. Shit, what a John. It's a museum. What? What is it? Asked Leslie, who could not make out anything in the jumping from side to side selenium of the flashlight, and she saw something scary. Wait, there is a light bulb, Carlos said and flicked the switch. A warm yellow light flooded the secret place that John had never allowed any living soul to enter. But it made everything in the place visible, and that made Leslie feel bad. On the walls, there were pictures of portraits of some people, obviously inhabitants of bygone eras, and colorful, gloomy posters of horror movies, on which monsters with fangs, in which it was easy to recognize vampires of all colors, were attacking people or just muzzled at the audience. On the rare shelves, there were some bottles of colored glass and clay pots. And books. Oh, they seemed to be scary to touch, but they were scattered on several tables and even a chair. But the most unanswered questions of all were the weapons. Ancient sabers and daggers, and a crossbow hanging from the ceiling. There were also some huge sheets of absorbent cotton scrawled with bizarre symbols. From the ceiling, besides the crossbow, there were bundles of herbs and ancient coins hanging on red threads. What the hell is that? What were you, John? Steve said with a nervous chuckle. I guess, said Harvey, leaning sideways for something. Our grandfather was a hunter. A hunter? Leslie shook her head and didn't know whether to cry or laugh hysterically. Aha, Carlo continued and raised his find, a sharply sharpened wooden stake, ire for all to see. A vampire hunter, he said and kicked the scattering of stakes left on the floor. They didn't stay in that strange room for long, but they ran out, without speaking, but quickly and together, and without words. The atmosphere was very heavy. Naturally, any further routine cleaning and dismantling of things in the house of the deceased was out of the question. Mom, I'm mad at you, Emma pouted. Why didn't you take me with you? I'll buy you a chocolate bar. And a doll with braids, the one that Princess Frog, do you want? Suddenly, Leslie addressed her daughter affectionately. You only about what you saw here, my dear, about what we went behind the door. Don't tell anyone, okay? Let it be our secret? Okay, after thinking about it, the girl replied, and a big box of marmalade too. Okay, Leslie patted the baby on the head. In the evening of the same day, they gathered for a council at Leslie's house. So, we need to decide what to do about all this, she said. There was a kettle on the table and fried meat pies in a dish. Well, the man had a quirk, Steve said. John was a good man, a worldly man. He did no harm to anyone, only good. That's right, Leslie sighed. She turned her head and looked at the door in the next room, where she had just put her daughters to bed. What was he going to do about it now? Why did he need all this? What the hell was he collecting? It's like a crazy collection. That's what I'm thinking, Steve suggested thoughtfully, that it would be necessary to involve some specialists, maybe the museum staff. They can tell us what he's worth. Look at me like that, Leslie. We have to deal with this, don't we? Or do you just want to leave it alone? What? It's a thought. In his usual joking manner, Harvey said, Now you know, it's fashionable to celebrate this holiday Halloween. City people can come, and you will let them into this room of horrors for money for a tour. Oh, come on, you're talking night terrors. The landlady waved him away. I'm thinking. John's interest was unhealthy. Who believes in vampires these days? But he couldn't have been. That? She lowered her voice, as if someone might overhear them and inadvertently witness her insulting the dead man with her suspicions. He couldn't be a maniac, could he? When would he have time? Steve took a pie. He was always working or sitting around the house. No, sometimes he went to town, but my wife's favorite news is crime news, and she watches TV loudly, so that willy-nilly you listen. In general, I have not heard that someone with a stake in the heart found. Oh, my head hurts already. Leslie poured herself a hot cup of tea, but she didn't touch the drink and sat there glumly. If we'd known earlier, maybe we could have helped Pedia. What? Harvey asked snidely. Did you advise me to buy some garlic for planting? There, you found time for jokes. Steve reproached him. A sense of humor can be a life-staker in dangerous situations. Harvey winked. Personally, I'll have something to tell you about. Not right now, of course, but one day I'll be able to tell you how I went into the lair of a psychopathic neighbor and came back alive. And you know, I think, wait a minute. Harvey jumped up from the table and ran into the corridor where he came to Leslie's house, by the way, put on the floor some bag. Leslie thought that, probably from work, just came to her. But Harvey worked now as a programmer and set up the internet in the village. Here, the guy put down on the table two things: a big and thick notebook and a padded cover, and a small painting that would fit in the palm of your hand. You took something out of there? Leslie was shocked. Why? It's not a pyramid, so I'll be damned for looting it. Harvey grinned. At least I hope so. While you were rustling around in the hallway, You've said you dropped your house keys there, Steve said reproachfully, interrupting him. Well, you'd have started grumbling. I saw the looks on your faces when you came out of there. And I noticed that there was a notebook in the corner, and I thought it might be something important. Anyway, I looked in and it was a diary. John kept it, and it seemed to explain everything. Well, almost everything. Harvey opened the notebook. Well, read it. Steve hurried him up. And the boy began to read aloud. It turned out that John was not as simple as he seemed. He had a higher education and was a PhD candidate. His specialty was the culture of Eastern Europe of the 14th and 15th centuries. John mentioned that his research might have been more complete if his friend, also a scholar, had taken him seriously, but the latter had only laughed at him. Some of the pages in the diary were missing, and one could only wonder why this happened. That's why it seemed sometimes that there were solid gaps between the parts of John's narrative, and yet the essence was clear. As clear as the gist of something that looks like madness can be. It turned out that John had gone to study to be a historian, a cultural historian, not for nothing, but under the influence of his own grandfather, who was also a scientist. The grandfather said that they were obliged to understand why there was a curse over their family and how to lift it. The essence of this curse was that all the men in the family had unhappy marriages, and if it was only about divorces, wives went mad. They had accidents right on the wedding anniversary. Some left their husbands with babies in their arms. Others pushed their spouses to gambling and other vices, and disappeared somewhere in the horizon with lovers. John's grandfather believed that everything came from the fact that at the end of the 18th century, one of their ancestors had enriched himself in an evil, criminal way, and thus made powerful enemies who cursed him. And it wasn't just ordinary people or even wizards. It was vampires. That's why John's grandfather taught him from a young age that there was a secret science to recognize a vampire. You know, if my grandfather had locked me in a dugout in the woods when I was a kid, when I was soiling the mattress, so afraid of the dark, Steve interrupted his reading, I'd have grown up crazy too. What's the matter? Well, you don't have luck with women. It happens. Maybe there were happy marriages, but just this crazy grandfather did not want to mention them, so as not to spoil his statistics. Because, no, well, it's nonsense. I agree, nodded Harvey. In general, I thought, well, if you look at books and movies, that vampires, they attack to feed. And here, it turns out, not just simple vampires, but also in addition and blacksmiths. That's a lot of imagination. And what a callous heart you'd have to have, Harvey grinned. To take your own grandson into the woods and scare him with your stories. No wonder John's attic was leaking in places. I agree. Leslie sipped her iced tea. She wrinkled her nose and turned on the kettle for boiling water. I do not understand. And how could he get a higher education, work somewhere there, even in Europe on business trips? It turns out that he left his family, freed himself from its influence, and then it's as if his mind burst from all that he had experienced, from all that was hammered into his head. So, he was a normal person, and then he went completely insane. It happens, Steve said. It's rare, but it happens. Maybe they're hereditary, who knows? That's awful. Leslie shuddered. There was a man who lived. A good man was. Well, that only we know. Not a word, by the way, okay. She wagged her finger. John did a lot of good for the Ovrachki, and he doesn't deserve to be treated like a buffoon when he's dead. Not a word, said Harvey. Me neither. Steve confirmed it. What does it say next? Wait, let me. Your voice is getting a little hoarse. So, here we go. John wrote that at a certain point his career in Europe did not go well, or to be more precise, his colleagues, seeing his strong interest in the legends of vampires, began to make fun of him. And when he became so interested in this topic that he ceased to be able to keep up with everything else, he was kicked out with shame and ridicule. But he wasn't upset, because he knew that he had already done enough to get on the trail of those creatures that had once ruined the life of his kind. His family's life was ruined. Harvey mocked the diary entry. That's interesting. So his ancestors were thieves, vampires were sorcerers, and he was cursed for the deed. But not a word about that. No way. John's pretending his family are innocent victims. That's a neat trick. Wait, we'll have time to have our say. Steve raised his finger. It's even more interesting. And literally in 2 lines, John mentioned that while still a student, he met the love of his life, the beautiful Sophia. But she chose someone else over him, which, naturally, was blamed on the curse. Dryly and also briefly, John mentioned that the business in the early 90s was easier for him than he had expected, and that in principle, he already realized that his life's work would never be finished, because his search was cut short, ended in nothing. Because that rich family, in which part of the people were unclean, they died at the end of the 19th century, and their children left no descendants. Anyway, it looked like it was all over. But despite that, in the late 90s, John found people who were connoisseurs of antiques and antiquities and bought from them things that had been used in the last century and earlier by real vampire hunters. He thought that just in case, he should be ready to destroy the creatures of the night. Such existed? Ag Leslie. Who were they, the crazies, hunting? I suppose they were just swindling money out of honest citizens, said Harvey, and who would demand proof from them? They lied that the vampire turned to ashes after the stake. That's all. And the ashes were blown away by the breeze. Or maybe they got a homeless guy. So, I won't touch those daggers and sabers with my bare hand, Leslie said with feeling. That's horrible. You don't know what's next, said Steve grimly, looking at the very end of the diary. And he did. It turned out that John had tested all the neighbors in the village to see if they were vampires by any chance. He'd written earlier in his diary that vampires shouldn't walk in the sun. But then he'd added that, since all living things evolve in nature, vampires, though not living things, could theoretically evolve, too, which meant he couldn't relax. So he looked around at the villagers. But he never suspected anyone in the end. It turned out that John didn't find any specific signs of vampires, such as moles in the corner of the eyes or fingers fused to the webbing. However, he added that in addition to such flaws, a true vampire should not cast shadows at sunset. In general, the neighbors were beyond suspicion. Good, Harvey grinned. Or, imagine waking up to John with a crossbow or a silver blade. That's hilarious. Right, hilarious to death. Steve kicked the guy's foot under the table, saying, "This is no time for jokes, and your jokes, brother, are so bad." What about the painting? Leslie asked. Judging by the artist's signature, it was painted at the very end of the 19th century. Harvey turned it. It was a portrait. It showed a lovely young girl with hair as black as a raven's wing. She was dressed and combed in a fashion stylized in antiquity, which made her seem fragile and ephemeral. Judging from the entries in his journal, Steve sighed. This was the same maiden from the vampire family. She died of measles when she was 18. That's what they'd written back then. But John believed it was one of the last of the vampires in the clan, and she was just running away so the hunters wouldn't catch up. Beautiful, Steve added. Why don't they have girls like that anymore? There are girls like that now, Leslie said pityingly. It's just that you're in trouble. What? Is your girl very violent? Yeah, Steve used to be embarrassed to talk about his marital problems, man. But then the cup of patience and the willingness to bear it all in silence overflowed. Steve wasn't originally a villager. He was born in a big city, and as he thought in his youth, in the most beautiful of Mussolini. Mother did not remember, did not know, died at his birth. So the upbringing of little Olechka entirely fell on the shoulders of the remaining two relatives of his father and grandmother on his side. And as long as Steve remembered his childhood, his grandmother embodied for him affection, care, warmth, understanding, kindness, and his father's strictness, coldness, indifference, offenses, but he still loved him. And as soon as he began to realize himself, he began to feel that he must be so defective, not good, if his father did not love him. When Steve was 12 years old, his grandmother died of a stroke, and he and his father were left alone. At first, Steve was glad that her father did not drink. He thought that the absence of this vice gives any guarantees that they will live normally. But it turned out that there are other vices besides alcohol, and Steve's father turned out to be an irrepressible gambler. By the time Steve turned 18, his father had managed to lose everything that could be taken out of the apartment, and then the apartment itself. It turned out he'd somehow managed to pawn off his large share of the apartment for sports betting. And one day serious and gloomy people showed up in the apartment and put Steve before the fact that he had to sell them his tiny share for pennies because they would not let him live here. Steve raised his hand to his father for the first time in his life and just punched him in the face. "Did you wait, you old fool?" he shouted at his parent, looking straight into his eyes. "How many times have I tried to help you? You don't have a son anymore." Steve was bitter and hurt that his father had become like this, and taking advantage of his majority, the guy hurried to leave home. There was a place to live. He entered a neighboring city in the vocational school in the auto mechanic and managed to beat out a place in the dormitory. In general, a new life began. Steve didn't pick up the phone when his father called, and then the hospital called. His father, like his grandmother, had suffered a stroke, and just as quickly this disease took Steve's father to the other world. Having received an education by this time, Steve returned to his hometown to settle the real estate business. He went to consult with lawyers. They spread their hands and honestly said that all attempts to nullify the deal, once made by his father, doomed to failure in advance. Then Steve agreed to sell his share of the apartment. The money raised in the city for housing, even the worst room would not be enough, and realizing that the rented housing, this money just in nowhere will go nowhere in someone else's pocket, Steve decided that he needs to move to the village. Only here he could buy at least some real estate. Steve bought the house from a couple of old dandelion men who were moving to the city with their grown-up children. That house was scary to look at, but Steve, as it happened, could not only work with his hands, but also loved it, so that slowly what seemed to be a barn became a very decent dwelling. In the village itself, with work was not abundant, but in the district center for a smart car mechanic was a lot of work, and Steve realized here it is, his chance to arrange a normal with the mind of his life. That's when he met Harvey, who was just a kid at the time. And somehow it so happened that they became friends, although the people around, by the way, this friendship did not understand especially. Harvey liked to ask about city life, that he was already a dreamer without coasts, and Steve was charged by him optimism easy, despite all the circumstances, a view of life. By the will of fate, by his 23 years of age, Steve had virtually no experience of relationships with the opposite sex. It just so happened in the technical school about studying thought, in the village first time about work and repairing the house. Looking back later, Steve believed that it was his inexperience played a cruel joke on him. He believed that it was because of this that he had given in so violently to his feelings when he met Julia. She was from a neighboring village where she had returned from the city, where she had studied to become a seamstress. They met in the district center, just came to eat at a fast food, and sat at the same table because there were almost no free seats. They talked. Steve was impressed by Lucy's story, and it turned out that her family was not easy either. Mom, for example, spent half her life in a madhouse, could not accept the departure of her first and only lover to another woman. But not from that favorite man's daughter was born, and from some random man. Julia, in fact, was raised by her maternal grandparents, and they never hid from her what a problem her mother was. Lucy confessed that she was always afraid of going crazy and repeating her mother's fate. Steve saw in Lucy a kindred spirit, a person with a similar fate, who also suffered from the imperfections of her family. And Lucy was also so quick-witted, talkative. She was so bright. She was capable of laughing to tears at the simplest of jokes and crying after watching a sad movie. She was not like, as it seemed to Steve, on Modern Girls, she did not care that he is not rich. She believed that the main thing is true love, and there is sure to settle everything and will be a family happiness. Marriage was concluded hastily, as if the promised happiness someone threatened to take away from them. And they lived, except that Steve, much later looking back, realized that he was blind. Didn't notice the obvious beacons indicating that his Lucy was no ordinary person. More than once he'd been ready to tear his hair out, remembering how her grandparents had taken him aside and politely told him he was a nice guy, but their Lucy was no match. Then Steve decided that they didn't think he was good enough for their granddaughter. Too late he realized how wrong he was. They just wanted to warn him, to save him. Soon after the wedding, Steve, spending whole days together with Lucy, began to notice how abruptly, violently her moods changed. They could quarrel over nothing. He sometimes could not get an answer from his wife to a simple question, and what was his fault once again? Steve tried to adapt to Lucy's mood swings. He was shocked when she accused him of flirting with a postmistress who was old enough to be his grandmother. Steve used to find funny stories, anecdotes, and tales about pathologically jealous husbands. But now he himself had become a hostage of his spouse. That story with the postmistress, by the way, did not end simply so Lucy hit Steve on the street. Then she cried and apologized, saying she didn't know what had come over her. Looking back again and again, Steve realized he should have divorced then. To understand who was hiding under the mask of a cute, bright in its emotionality girl, but then Lucy reported that she was pregnant. Now divorce was out of the question. Steve wrote off all her increasing whims, nagging and scandals on the fact that pregnant women, they say, hormonal changes, her strange behavior after the appearance of Barry, he wrote off to postpartum depression. Steve learned to anticipate the change of Julie's moods, learned to talk to her carefully, not to make her angry, not to piss her off, not to drive her crazy, and not to ask for scandals. He realized that all this is abnormal somehow, but did not know what to do with it all. Steve was sometimes horrified at how he had gotten used to it, how, as it turned out, he had lost his pride and desire for a normal life during the time he had spent as Lucy's husband. It was, by the way, especially strange that in public Lucy rarely broke down in general, was silent and timid, talking to him politely. However, Steve himself, having studied her carefully over the years, could already guess when, for example, behind her seemingly ordinary words, there is a harsh, cruel implication, which others simply do not notice. Steve feared that his son would eventually acquire the same oddities as his mother, except that Barry grew up quite different from her little man. He was kind, cheerful, sincere, easy to make friends, and when Barry began to grow up, it became clear that with his father he finds a much better common language than with his mother, whom the boy generally shunned. Steve, after the birth of his son, resigned himself to the fact that his personal life did not succeed. But then, when his wife launched at him with a pot of freshly boiled potatoes, Steve suddenly stopped shy and came to Leslie for ointment for burns, took and cried. He said that he tolerated the marriage only for the sake of his son, but as the boy grows up, that's it, he will divorce. Leslie was a little shocked by this confession, but then said that yes, she felt that there was something wrong in Steve's family. She supported him that divorce was the only option. Leslie knew firsthand. True, she hadn't been divorced herself, but she had endured 2 painful separations in her life with Selena and Emma's fathers. The first man said that he loved, that he wanted a family, but changed his mind as soon as he learned of Leslie's pregnancy and did ban or ran away somewhere else, before saying that the alimony to file useless because to spike her will work in the gray. Leslie decided that from the traitor will not take a penny. She held on for a long time, but then decided that the world, it is a complicated thing and you can, perhaps, the fate to get a second chance at female happiness. That man, with whom she got together, was as if even more serious than the first. But he also betrayed the matter was that he learned that there would be a girl, began to insist on termination, saying that he needed a son, hair jeans, and not a useless girl. After that, Leslie firmly decided no more men. Let it be better to be a peaceful female kingdom and personal life. You can, and without them to find happiness. The main thing that the daughters were healthy and happy, fed and satisfied with everything. You're sorry, said Leslie, when Steve once again came to talk to the neighbor and complain about his wife. But Lucy, well, maybe it's not just her temper. You said her mom was crazy. Maybe. Don't take offense, she added hastily, but maybe. Should she see a psychologist? I've thought about that. Steve sighed. I don't know. I suggested counseling. There's couples therapy for troubled couples now, but it's not gonna work. When I talked to her, She thought I wanted to put her in a mental institution. Can you believe it? Leslie shook her head at you. You're carrying a family all by yourself. It was like that after the birth of her son. Lucy quit her job as a seamstress. First, because it was naturally maternity leave. And then, she began to say that machines gave her a headache, and in general, she was satisfied with the role of a housewife. Steve, who saw how her mood could deteriorate if she stayed long among people, agreed that he just painfully wanted at least a more or less quiet life. Besides, he now worked in a large auto repair shop in the district center, and his income was enough for everything and everyone. And it so happened that Harvey knew about his problems in the family, because he was Steve's best friend, and although he was a joker, a talker, but never gave away other people's secrets. And now, the whole little company was united by one dark and strange secret, and for some reason, it seemed that its consequences could be very serious. "What are your plans for the land, Leslie?" Steve asked. "I have no idea," Leslie shrugged and sighed. "It's fall. If it were summer or spring, I'd have more to worry about. Well, the harvest there to gather. And so, it turns out, nothing if the land without it. Literate agricultural care to build until spring." "Oh, it's not about that now. We need to think about what we should do with our finds. So what shall we do? It seems to me it would be better to, I don't know, to clean up all these John's riches quietly and pretend they never happened. It'd be better for everybody." Harvey had a thought common to the whole little company. However, they decided not to talk about anything else. The time was late, and it seemed to everyone that there was no strength to think about anything. The next day, Leslie did not even appear in the neighbor's house. She was busy with her own affairs. Then she began to clean up slowly and move some of her things to her place. Harvey insisted that the things from that room should also be sorted out, because all sorts of creepy things, like a saber with a conspiracy on the blade or aspen stakes, it's one thing, but old paintings and books of obvious antique origin, it's quite another. All these things were carefully, and most importantly, quietly, so as not to excite anyone's curiosity, also transferred to Leslie's house. The paintings were covered with a cloth, so as not to accidentally damage them. And then there was a fire, and John's house burned down. Just one night, Leslie woke up from a knock on the window and shouting neighbors jumped out, and there, burning so that to look terrible. The firefighters turned out to be guys quick, but only the elements have tried, and not only the elements. "It's arson," one of the firemen said confidently. "That's what it looks like." "What?" Leslie couldn't believe it. "Who would have thought of that? I mean, why would you do something like that?" "Who knows?" the fireman shrugged, taking off his helmet and eagerly emptying his water bottle. "Who knows? You say this house of your dead grandfather was. Well, there was once such a case, though. There was a mansion extinguished. In general, a businessman divorced his wife, and under the marriage contract, she, as they say, barefoot remained. Apparently, she took offense at that and set fire to the house. That's how it happens. We have good people." Leslie felt offended for the people of her native village. She realized that she couldn't vouch for everyone here. But such an act seemed a wildness, not at all suitable for the peaceful way of life of Ovrajki. In the morning, of course, everyone went to see what was left. There wasn't much left. Not much at all. Leslie could only rejoice that she had managed to drag a lot of things into the house. And then while she was walking there, coughing from the bitter dust rising up with every step, then suddenly, like lightning, she realized who could have done it. "Maria, come out, you wretch." Leslie, puffed up with righteous anger, knocked on the shriveled door of the outermost house in the village. "Why are you making so much noise?" The owner of the house looked out, asleep and swollen from drinking. "What do you want? You'll wake everyone up. Normal people are already up and working." Leslie gritted her teeth and without any preamble poked Maria in the chest with her index finger. "Tell me why you burned down John's house, huh? You were jealous that he bequeathed everything to normal people and not to you, a tornado, right? What are you talking about?" Maria's eyes widened. "I didn't set fire to anything." "Oh, you lied." Leslie squinted unkindly. "Why would anyone else? You're the only one capable of such a thing. You lost your human form a long time ago. What are you?" Maria looked very bad, but so looked now that Leslie suddenly thought that maybe, and she is not to blame for the arson. After all, before, no matter how drunk she was, and did not do nasty things to the villagers, I think. Maybe your men set the fire. Leslie made a new accusation, but not so confidently. What men? I'm living with one now. What do you take me for? You think if I don't work now, if I drink, I'm a criminal? What do you know about me? Do you have a conscience? Leslie pressed her lips together. Even if she was wrong, she wasn't going to apologize. Not to someone like that lost soul. Okay, maybe it's not you, she said and turned around and walked away from Maria's house. 2 weeks passed and the fire began to be forgotten. Life went on in Barrow. Everyone had their own worries. But then the villagers were in a flash excited by a new event. It was that a man from the town had come to the village. He came in an expensive black Jeep with tinted windows, and on the second car came some, apparently, specialists because they had in their hands some tools and walked on the field, which was usually sown with beets and belonged to John. And then, leaving the experts aside, this man went straight to Leslie's house. Mom's not home, said Selena looking out the door. She's at the store, and I'm home with my sister. She's sick. She seems to have the flu. A man in a business suit and shiny shoes that looked like they were made of crocodile skin thanked her for the answer, wished her well, and came straight to the store. He came at an unfortunate moment. Leslie was just arguing with Grandma Sarah. In general, Sarah was a quiet old woman, but sometimes and usually right after receiving her pension, apparently out of frustration, because of the fact that this very pension in her hands very quickly ran out, she began to look for someone in the village to pick on, and her choice usually fell on the post office or the store. There was still, of course, a paramedic, but with him Sarah maintained the best relations that he treated well. And the others? Grandma Yulia liked to say about them that they were just service personnel, tools of capitalism, so let them blame themselves if they dared not respect her rights. This time Sarah's grandmother's right was violated by the fact that they sold her as if it were stale smoked fish. In fact, Leslie was ready to swear by her own health that the fish was the freshest. But Sarah wouldn't listen. Give me the complaint book, and I want my money back. Where to? Give me back the fish, I pay for it. The old woman raised her voice to such an extent that the people who were stuck in line after her appearance even cringed. If the goods are of poor quality, they should be returned to the store, said the saleswoman. Sarah snorted and started tapping her palm on the counter. Leslie seriously thought about the fact that under the strong blows of a dry, gnarled foot glass can and crack. I want my money back, and more, condensed milk as compensation for moral damage. 2. No, give me 4 cans. Sarah, maybe that's enough? A man looked out from the queue. You should be ashamed of your neighbors. The fish here is fine. We got it yesterday. Excuse me, are you Leslie? A new face appeared in the store, attracted attention because the man was tall, a head taller than everyone here. I'm tired of being pushed around by Grandma Sarah. Leslie, what do you want? Are you from the insurance company? No, the man answered. I need to talk to you. I'm working. What time do you get off? What do you want? Come on, hurry up. I'm so fed up with everything. Leslie spluttered, snatching the bag with caramel pads from Sarah's hands, which she, quietly muttering something under her nose, managed to pull. You see, I've come from Washington and what? Leslie was on the verge a little more and was ready to swear everyone out of the store. And then it would be nice to crawl under the shelves with buns, like a mouse and sob from the heart. Maybe then stavate it and a second breath will open. You see, I don't have much time and I need to speak to John Harris. What's this about? It's a private conversation. Well, get out of the store, and then come back sometime. The man hesitated. Leslie felt sorry for him. He looked so confused. Take it, please, he said, holding out his business card to her. Call me, please, when you're free. He left and Leslie breathed a sigh of relief at last. No distractions. She finally fought off Grandma Sarah, who bought condensed milk, tea, and buckwheat, grumbled about the fish, and left. After her 8-pin shift was over, Leslie pulled a business card and a phone out of her pocket and dialed the number. In general, she had no energy at all for any kind of conversation, but the stranger's appearance was unsettling. And those words of his about her being in Harris, it seemed to her that he, maybe someone like a lawyer. Although, where is it that a notary sends someone to talk to heirs in inheritance cases? Alexander, you stopped by today. Yes, let's figure out how the are you still here? A minute later, Leslie saw a car parked nearby, and out of it came this guy. He took the phone away from his ear and walked over to her. "You guys have been waiting in a car all day?" "Actually, it's been a couple hours. I thought it would be easier for me to wait until your store's business hours were over. I need to talk to you right away. What's on fire?" "I beg your pardon?" "Never mind. What's your hurry?" Leslie nervously fixed a strand of hair that had gotten out of the tight bun at the back of her head. In general, initially she was almost peaceful, but as soon as this guy with a look that would make him a soap opera announced the purpose of his arrival, Leslie flared with indignation and threw under his nose a folded figure made of fingers. "This is my land, not mine." "Wait," Alexander darted after the wide-stepping woman. "I just wanted to." Leslie snorted angrily. She knew what he wanted. It turned out that he had come to negotiate the purchase of John's land, and he said it in a derogatory way. "You don't know anything about farming anyway, so let's negotiate. I'm offering a good price." Leslie was in principle not evil and very even patient person. But not in this case. "You offer such a thing because you are a woman or a countrywoman?" "Excuse me?" blurted out Alexander, who almost crashed into her so abruptly she stopped, turning abruptly to him. "Well, you're saying I can't manage." She pointed a finger at his chest, somewhere in the center of his silk tie. "Is it because you're a city girl and I'm a country girl, or because you think women are dumber than you are?" "I didn't mean to say anything like that." "But you did." "Listen." Alexander must have been zealously guarding his personal space, because he took Leslie's hand gently by the wrist and pulled it away from him. It was strange, but the skin-to-skin contact gave her goosebumps for some reason. The thing is, John didn't just own a field of vegetables, greenhouses and all. He owned another piece of land. It's all wooded now. It's a lot of land. And problematic. It needs to be cleared. "Yes? I've never heard of such a thing," Leslie said thoughtfully, but with a hint of doubt. "Perhaps because you just helped John, but did not do business with him, found something to aptly wound Leslie's city type with the appearance. Now she knew exactly who he could play in the show, cunning, heartless lawyer working for the mafia." "Maybe," Leslie pursed her lips, "but that doesn't mean I'm going to sell it all for nothing. I haven't named the price yet. You've definitely underestimated it." "Can I ask you why you have that opinion of me? Why you think I'm undervaluing?" "I don't know," Leslie answered honestly. "I just don't like you. I don't like you very much. That's it. I'm going home. And don't follow me, or else. We could just." "No." She turned on him with a triumphant look. "We can and we won't. Never. Leave me alone already, please." The sky was filled with siso gray clouds. A storm was approaching. Leslie walked towards the house, and although she looked back, she was sure that the city type got into the car and drove away. She had a feeling that she was being followed. It seemed to her that someone's heavy, unkind gaze was fixed on her back. Nervously shrugging her shoulders, Leslie entered her house. Thinking that it was, of course, she had imagined it after her meeting with Alexander. She didn't know that the unkind gaze had actually followed her from afar, and then glared at her door for several minutes. She didn't know that the threat she felt wasn't just a dream. It was as real as the rumble of thunder in the distance, and the threat had been born that night, when she had risked bringing the paintings that the old man knew were of real vampires from John's secret room into her house. Nothing happened in the village for about a week. That is, happened of course, but in fact, these events belonged to ordinary, everyday life and did not shock anyone. Leslie went into town to see a notary. The notary turned out to be not only a professional, but also a helpful man. When Leslie shared with him her confusion about how to manage the farm, he advised her to contact some farmers in the neighborhood to help them properly take care of the land and plantings. "It's not a simple matter," said the notary. "If you live in the countryside, you know how much care the land needs. My wife and I have a cottage. We missed a couple of months this year in the spring was no time, then came back, and therein pests have already feasted, and also fertilizers. It turns out, these nitrogen fertilizers should have been laid in due time, and missed, and well," he waved his hand. "In general, it is not an easy business farming. And if you think, as you say, still sell or maybe rent, then come, I will help, advise on all matters." Leslie left the city satisfied with the fact that the notary turned out to be a solid, intelligent, and soulful to a certain extent man. "Daughter, why are you on the phone again? Take some books to read, or it will be again in literature twos, my grief," grumbled at Selena Leslie while molding another pie. the previous batch is already in full blush on the pan. "Mom, why do I even need to study?" Leslie responded her daughter. "We are rich." "You're so smart," Leslie sighed. "Rich, but not like that, as we sell everything, so according to you, what, I'll lose everything, Skip?" "No, my dear, you should put it away. You should live wisely, frugally. And then, do you think the rich can be fools? But now I don't have to go to university. I can start a business right away. Startup." Leslie rolled her eyes. She sometimes did not understand how she could have two such different daughters. One is smart, sweet, and the second rebels in his 12 years, so that even how? What kind of business is there to talk about at that age? She's just a little girl. "No, you'll study. You'll go to university when the time comes." "Mom, I'm going to be a blogger soon." "A what?" "A blogger. I'm gonna have millions of followers. Right now, because you're sitting on the bed eating cookies again, we're gonna have millions of cockroaches. Now get out of here." Leslie, sighing again, continued molding and frying pies. She was already regretting being so harsh with Alexander. Not that she was going to sell the land, but it was worth admitting she really didn't have much idea what to do with it all next. I mean, theoretically, one could eventually figure it out and take up farming too. But Leslie remembered the conversation at the notary's office. He had mentioned how much land John owned. And it turned out that indeed, there was not only a field of vegetables, greenhouses and so on, but also more pieces of territory. Here they, as it seemed to Leslie, could be sold. True, it's not clear what this guy was going to do there. However, the main thing is to sell. And with the proceeds of the money could do a lot of things. First of all, we could build a new house. 2 stories, with a glassed-in veranda and a big greenhouse. Maybe even a greenhouse. Leslie had always dreamed of growing exotic flowers. She got so excited, she almost burned the pies. Having finished cooking, Leslie called her daughters to eat and drink tea. She decided that she would call Alexander tomorrow. Barry loved his daddy very much, and if daddy told him to behave himself and not to go to dangerous places at night, then of course he would obey him. Because daddy was smart and good, and such advice would have sounded sensible. But it was mommy who told him to stay home, to study, not to walk, not to play, and so Barry just couldn't stay home on a night like this, because he disliked his mother exactly as much as he adored his father. No, there was a time in his life when his mommy seemed the best, but then, when she began to behave so strangely and swear at daddy, when she began to scold his own son for nothing, Barry suddenly realized that she didn't need him. He understood, and in books he had read that one should be able to forgive, to understand that people can make mistakes, but there was no patience. And since so far, Barry realized he was too young to live the way he wanted, he could at least do the little things against his mother's word. That's why he agreed to help his daughter Leslie. In fact, his mom was adamantly opposed to him hanging out with Selena. She said that she was like her mother. She said that Leslie had her eye on her father and she wouldn't tolerate it. Hearing this for the first time, Barry thought that he would give everything to Selena if it could be made so that his mother suddenly became Aunt Leslie and not the woman who was his own parent. And so, at an hour deep past midnight, Barry now stood with Sveta at the ruins of John's house. They had climbed up to the second floor. It was almost unscathed by the fire. Only darkened, blackened, it was gloomy. But if one were to use one's imagination, one could imagine that they were in an ancient, ruined castle haunted by ghosts. Selena had talked her little friend into this obviously crazy idea after overhearing a curious conversation between her mother and the neighbors who visited her. Selena used to hate it when her mom made her go to John's house, because the old man was strange, he smelled bad. But then that night, Selena couldn't sleep, and she went to the door and heard such a thing. She was shocked the negro turned out to be crazy. He had a bunch of dark stuff. Naturally, as soon as she could, Selena went to see what her mom had brought. She was a little disappointed because there were no cursed dolls or gold, but there was a painting of a supposed vampire. Selena gave the portrait a tongue lashing, and it wasn't scary at all, just some black-haired girl. The girl was offended that her mother considers her a little girl and does not tell about anything. And then she visited the idea of how this mystical story can be promoted on the network. In general, Selena had a few subscribers, only 100, but she had no doubt that if she released such a video, it would collect 1 million. But to act alone, it was not too comfortable. She was also afraid. That's why Selena called her son Steve to come along. "My dear followers, I'm glad to welcome you on my page." Saying this, Selena held a smartphone on her outstretched hand in front of her. "Today you and I will try to summon a vampire. Yes, yes, we're going to summon a ghoul. My friend Barry and I have snuck into a forbidden and cursed house. We're about to begin. In the meantime, please subscribe and like me." With a concentrated sniffle, the girl set her smartphone on a tripod. "Come on, Barry," Selena said cheerfully, and sending a smile to her audience, started to help him. Chalk to draw a circle and symbols. Candle to bait the monster with live fire. Salt to ward it off when it arrives. Sticking out her tongue with eagerness, Celine drew a circle that was uneven. Then the candle didn't want to light. But finally, everything was done. Maybe we shouldn't. I've seen it in American documentary movies. Barry wanted to ask what exactly she saw as hunters running away from the evil, or an example of how to deceive their subscribers, but did not say a word because he really heard something. They were not alone in the house. The boy distinctly heard footsteps below them on the first floor. Selena, there's someone here." "Good," she nodded. "I see natural fear. But first." The girl was about to turn on the camera. She stepped back a couple steps, then mussed her hair with her fingers and started making faces, apparently choosing the best ones for this performance. And then suddenly the floor under her feet crunched. The old boards, sharpened by the fire, began to sag and Selena fell down. It would have been a disaster, but the girl had fallen only to her waist, and she had spread her arms and clung to the floor. Barry picked up on his friend's startled cry and rushed to her. "I've got her, I've got her, I've got her," he gibbered, grabbing her by the shoulders and the collar of her jacket. And suddenly Selena froze, her eyes rounded, her face, though it was hard to see anything in the pitch darkness, turned white. "Someone is dragging me from below," she whispered. "Someone's got me by the legs." And as if to confirm it, a voice came from the first floor. "Don't move. Everything can collapse. Let go. I'll catch you." But these words, very roughly, only Barry could make out. But Selena? Apparently the girl was in a panic, because he suddenly said, "Vampire! A vampire attacked me!" And then she squealed so loudly that Barry's ears popped. And then? Apparently the boards where she'd fallen through were flimsy, because suddenly Selena was all the way down, disappeared with a shriek down below. Barry didn't realize how he hadn't lost consciousness himself. He was acting as if on automatic. He moved along the wall. He had heard somewhere that this was the safest way. Carefully, one small step at a time, he reached the doorway. He heard something happening downstairs, a rustling, and then a new squeal, a scream. The boy couldn't stand it. Not thinking that anything else could collapse in this house, he rushed through the door and down the stairs. For a moment he looked up. The hole where Selena had fallen from was located, so that someone standing at the top of the stairs could reach Selena and pulled her down. But who was it? The boy, lighting his way with his smartphone, picked it up off the floor and climbed down the stairs. Selena was sitting at the bottom, teeth chattering, herself trembling, eyes round and staring at one point. "Are you all right?" Having asked the question, Barry was immediately embarrassed. What a stupid thing to say. A person can't be all right after something like that. "Someone saved you." He spoke again. "Didn't let you fall. Who was it? And why did he leave?" Celine looked up and then said only 3 words. "The vampire from the portrait." Naturally, the guys didn't have any thoughts of continuing to shoot anything. Now that it was over, they just silently left the house and walked home. To be more precise, they thought they were going home. But as soon as they stepped over the threshold, they were blinded by the light of the headlights and deafened by the screams. It turned out that Selena's mom and Barry's dad had rushed to the house. The adults rushed over to the kids. They began to examine them, shaking them, asking them what they were doing. How dare they go out in the middle of the night in such a place? And then it turned out that the relatives were here not because they simply discovered the disappearance of offspring and went to look for it, was that both of them received a call from an unknown number. The voice sounded strangely distorted, but it seemed to belong to a woman, and he said that the children were at John's house. "I'll get you." Leslie seemed to take a swing at her daughter, but the next moment she just hugged her child tightly and burst into tears. Selena picked up on the roar and started swearing to her mother that she would never do that again on Selena. "Well, boy, you're screwed," said Steve to his son. "What were you doing in there, huh?" Selena wanted to make a video for her subscribers. "We were on the 2nd floor and we wanted to summon a vampire." "What? What 2nd floor, son?" "It was on fire. You could have fallen. You can't even go in the house." Selena did fall, Barry sniffed. He didn't think he'd incur the wrath of his parents by telling the truth. The floor had broken. Her legs fell through, but someone was downstairs and, well, he saved her, caught her and pulled her down. "What?" Leslie, hearing this, lost her pitying mood and began to shake her daughter so that she clenched her teeth. "Oh, you! Oh, for crying out loud! What are you thinking about, Mom? You could have killed yourself. I won't let you out of my house until you're 20. You wanted to make a video. I'll show you a video." With those last words, Leslie grabbed her daughter's smartphone out of Barry's hands and just slammed it to the floor with all her might, then kicked it over. "That's it. Your Dos Vida is over, Selena. Get ready." Already on the approach to the village, Steve and Leslie decided not to have any educational conversations in the middle of the night and in general to postpone all the worrying care until morning. "Now like mice back home, let's hope Mom is sleeping soundly," said Steve. He and his son entered the house, quietly, sneaking. "Come on, let's go to your room." "Daddy." "Shh." Steve tousled his son's hair. "You know the most important thing to me is that you're alive and well. I'm not mad anymore. But this is gonna be a serious conversation. You and me, not a word to Mom." "Thank you." Barry sniffed his nose and went to his room. Steve had long ago slept on the couch in the great room instead of in the marital bedroom. Now he peeked out the bedroom door and it was quiet. Sometimes Lucy snored in her sleep, but now it was as quiet as if she hadn't been home at all. Steve took off his shoes, walked to the couch, but sleep wouldn't come, not only because of what his son had done, but also because it just so coincidentally ran out of strength to live in such a terribly funny parody of marriage. But what else was there to do? The only thing to do was to endure. "What hurts?" Leslie asked her daughter when we got inside. "Nothing. I told you, I'm not hurt. Mommy, please forgive me." "I forgive you, but you will be punished," Leslie said, spinning her around and groping her. But nothing seemed to be broken. "She's all grown up and she's making up such nonsense." "What vampire?" "From the portrait. He was there, really. He was there." "Yes, of course. That's enough. Go to sleep. We'll deal with this in the morning. Don't wake your sister." Selena went to the room she shared with Emma. Leslie sighed and went into the kitchen. "I don't think she'll be able to sleep now. At least have some coffee to stop the headache." What an event. As if there weren't enough problems. And then there was this strange phone call. It turns out that someone sneaked into the burned house that night and accidentally caught the children there and saved the girl from falling from such a height. But who could it be? Why did he give his name? And why would someone want to get into the house? She didn't believe her daughter's chatter for a minute, but John and his madness about vampires, a fire, and now the once mysterious and obviously not with white fluffy intentions. And then Leslie remembered that her daughter had taken something from John's things for her adventure, a small portrait and something else. It turns out it was left in the house. It was possible, of course, to go in the morning to take it, but it was going to rain and Leslie was afraid that the ancient canvas could be seriously damaged by dampness. And also, what if the rats would be interested and try it for a tooth? She wasn't sure about the rats, but the impending thunderstorm was a real problem. Leslie cursed quietly. The painting must be worth a lot of money and you can't throw away your wealth like that. So after checking that her daughters were both asleep at last, she grabbed a flashlight and left the house. It wouldn't take long, Leslie decided, and John's house was still basically solid. She would quietly, carefully go in, take what she needed and return. In the night darkness, illuminated by distant lightning flashes, John's house made a truly sinister impression. The flashlight beam twitched, jumped as Leslie entered it and carefully, checking each step with the toe of her sneaker, began to climb the stairs. A thunderclap in the sky was now very close, and she shrugged. What a nasty feeling, as if someone unkind was glaring at her back. "Don't be a fool. It's just nerves," Leslie told herself. The floor on the second floor looked suspicious, but she risked taking a couple of steps, especially since the painting and whatever else the silly daughter had stolen were lying right next to it. Taking the things, Leslie sighed with relief. Now home. And sleep. And in the morning. Everything would be in the morning, all later. She had already turned to the stairs when a flash of lightning illuminated the face opposite with a cold, ghostly light. "Lucy?" The neighbor stood on the stairs, silently looking up at Leslie. "What are you doing here?" "Oh, did you get a call too?" Leslie interpreted her appearance in her own way. Don't worry, the house is all yours. It's okay. It's just my stupid older sister. I'm sorry. I didn't know. I didn't even think she'd be smart enough to do that. It's okay. I can imagine how shocked you are. I almost lost my mind myself. Leslie talked and talked, and it did not immediately occur to her that Lucy looked strange for a mother disturbed by the fact that her son had run away from home. She stared unblinking, her face seeming as if chiseled from marble with hard features, her jaw tightly clenched. I'm not giving Steve up, Lucy said in a colorless voice. What? Who won't? Leslie sincerely didn't understand. Lucy, what are you talking about? And what are you here? What are you doing here? Leslie was used to living materially. She had never been oriented on any kind of premonitions and similar psychic abilities. But right now, she was as if struck. She felt the danger. Lucy, are you okay? Her voice treacherously shook as she turned to her neighbor. She suddenly smiled. Leslie swallowed hard. She remembered a documentary about wildlife, in which it was said that some predators are very good at sensing the fear of their victims, and its appearance is considered a signal to attack. It seemed to Leslie that something like that was happening to Lucy, who was acting strangely, and in this case, the victim was her, Leslie. You've wanted my Steve for a long time. Lucy's hands, which had been hanging along her body, now began to rise slowly, as if an invisible puppeteer was pulling the strings. I'm not giving him up. Lucy, what are you doing? The woman blinked confusedly. Steve and I are just friends. I'm raising my daughters alone, and I don't meet anyone. Lucy, please, let's get out of here and talk calmly about everything. First, you lay down with the old man. He gave you the house. Now you want my husband. Too bad you weren't in the house when it was burning. I should have brought you here and thrown you in. I should have burned the house down for nothing. Lucy muttered and looked angry. What? Leslie's mind was reeling from what she was hearing. She couldn't believe that Lucy had set the house on fire. You stole my mom's boyfriend, Lucy said in a very strange voice. You want to steal my man away from me? I won't, you bastard. I'll destroy you. Lucy screamed her last words and threw herself at Leslie. She recoiled, wanted to bounce away, but Lucy grabbed the floor of her clothes, pulled, and there Leslie's leg twisted on the stairs, and both women collapsed, rolled. Finding herself at the bottom, Leslie was horrified at the noise in her head. Then she realized that it was a storm raging outside, and her head was just splitting from the pain. Her shoulder was aching. She tried to stand up, and a sharp pain shot through her thigh. Leslie cried out and fell again. And then, her eyes widening in horror, she watched Lucy rise above her. How could she do that? Both of them had fallen, and this one had fallen like that. The neighbor, continuing to say that she would not let Steve be taken away, threw herself. Leslie realized that she was going for her throat and would not let go. It was painful, dark, incomprehensible, and hard. She tried to fight back, then realized that she had lost. Icy fingers clenched on her neck, her eyes flashed before her eyes, and suddenly Lucy flew backwards. Leslie coughed, blinked, and opened her eyes. Her neighbor was struggling with a tall, black-clad figure. The figure threw Julia to the floor, pinned her arms back, and something connected them, bound them, depriving her of the ability to fight further. And then the figure rushed toward Leslie and brought its face close to her. Leslie, if she had any strength left, would have screamed because the face belonged to the very girl of the portrait. It was that beautiful brunette from the 19th century. It was. Leslie felt like she must be going crazy, because it was a vampire. Stay still, the fiend said to her. I'll call an ambulance. Where are the fangs? Leslie asked, because she couldn't think of anything else right now. You vampires should have fangs. The girl smiled. Her teeth were what they called pearly straight, gorgeous, but there were no sharp, dagger-like fangs. I'm fed up with you, interfering. Why do you all come here? Said the beauty irritably. Steve. Dial, please, whispered Leslie, feeling that her strength was leaving her and she was ready to fall somewhere. Were you the one who called us? The brunette looked at Leslie with a strange mixture of contempt and curiosity, nodded. So you saved my daughter. Thank you. Leslie exhaled and finally lost consciousness. When Leslie opened her eyes again, she realized that she had been taken to the hospital. Her body, strangely enough, did not hurt, but she felt that she had been badly hurt in the house. Concussion. Lung. Vision will recover. The doctor's voice came through a layer of absorbent cotton. Leslie moaned softly, shook her head, and finally came to her senses. She was in the hospital. At the foot of the bed, a man in a white coat, of course, the doctor. Closer, sitting next to him on a chair and holding his hand, from which a pleasant warmth runs through the whole body, Steve. "And what are you doing here?" First of all, barely opening her lips, Leslie said when she saw Alexander, "You're here for the land, aren't you?" "Actually," the man coughed awkwardly, "to see you. No self-interest, believe me." "Leslie, it's okay." Steve turned to her. "The children are well looked after. Catherine's looking after them." Leslie nodded. Catherine was an old friend of his and also a shift worker at the store. Lucy, Leslie felt infinitely weak and wanted to sleep, but at the same time she realized that she had something to say and something to know right now, and she was afraid to fall asleep, still in the dark. "Yes, Lucy, Steve spoke. She's in care now. It was clear he was having a hard time speaking. He looked like a man who had aged a few years overnight. "She was the one who set the house on fire back then." "I know," Leslie nodded. "She thought we were. I should have noticed sooner." "It wasn't your fault, believe me," said the doctor, who had some insight into all that had happened. "The symptoms of your wife's illnesses were easy to mistake for normal, problematic personality traits." "Lucy went crazy," Steve finished. "The same thing happened to her that happened to her mother." Leslie didn't know how to find the proper words to comfort Steve. She only squeezed his fingers slightly in response and thought about the fact that he, no matter how bad he felt, would hang in there now. He must hold on for his son's sake. Leslie was now looking at the doctor. She was a little afraid that at the next words, she herself might be considered crazy. "I was saved." "I understand that you need to talk to your friends about something important," the doctor said, "but you can't be overworked for long. And I have to go," he finished and left the room. "It was my sister." Alexander suddenly entered the conversation. "Her name is Sophia, and her appearance, I swear, it was a complete surprise for me." What? "I don't understand." Leslie fixed her gaze on the capital's businessman. She was in shock because she did not understand what was going on. But Alexander, fortunately, had some answers. The small company could talk quietly because except Leslie there were no other patients in the room. And Alexander spoke. "It turned out that back then, in the 90s, John, looking for the right things for his collection of theoretical vampire hunter, not only bought them. One day he learned that a certain collector had what he needed, namely portraits of the last members of the very family, which, as he believed, kept vampire secrets. The collector told the people who came to inquire about the sale of the paintings that they were priceless treasures that were dear to him for personal reasons, and he would not agree to part with them, even if he were offered all the gold in the world. That's when John contacted the bandits. He paid them to steal the paintings, and it was done. The collector was almost heartbroken because he had spent years of his life searching for these paintings. And they were for him not just some works of art. They were directly related to the history of his family, because he was a distant descendant of that very family. His ancient ancestor, the connecting link was that black-haired beauty from the portrait in the ancient style. The noble family announced to everyone that the maiden died. She, they say, carried away by disease. But it was a lie. In fact, she had run away, preferring a love marriage with a poor man to a marriage of convenience with a rich man. That's why she, for such a disgrace, and decided to be removed from the fate of the family and its history. John, of course, did not know that the collector to whom he had dealt such a blow was a person related to those, so to speak, vampires he had been searching for so long. Otherwise, this story could have taken a very different turn. However, this story had developed over time. The thing was that the old collector had a son, whose name was Billy. He left in the 90s to build a business there. The son came back when he learned that his father's health had deteriorated. He spent his last days with his father. He held his hand and listened to his family man's last words about everything being wasted, his most precious possession stolen. Billy was not as passionate about antiques as his father, but he realized that now he just had to find the paintings. These paintings had to return to his family name, and that was it. He had used all his resources, but he hadn't managed to find out anything. Besides, Billy didn't have much time for that. He had to return to America, so as not to lose the business. There he met a woman named Monica and married her. This marriage produced 2 children, Sophia and Alexander. Alexander, when he grew up, decided to return to his native land and engage in agriculture. He was attracted to plants from childhood. He wanted to work with what grows on the ground. Sofia decided to follow in the footsteps of her paternal grandfather and become a historian. She went to France, then continued her education in England. They had little contact with his brother, and in many ways their views on life were different. So Alexander did not understand the almost desperate desire of Sofia to find the very missing paintings. Yes, he recognized that it was a great loss, but it is, after all, just a part of history, the past. Only his sister didn't want to hear about living in the present. She was stubborn. And about a year ago, she shared the news with her brother. She managed to get on the trail of the man who ordered the theft of the paintings. Sofia learned all about John, and she realized that he would not want to give the paintings, and he would not want to sell them, or even think something bad when he saw her face. The thing was that Sofia had a striking resemblance to the same girl who had long ago preferred love to money and position in society. Sofia knew this because she had seen a picture of one of the missing paintings. Sofia began to plan how to break into John's house and just steal the paintings. She thought she would repay him in kind, and it would be fair. But then John died, and his house burned down. But Sofia wasn't about to give up on her plans. She already knew that John had a secret room and thought that he might have had a cellar under the house, some kind of secret place, in which the paintings could be preserved, unharmed by the fire. Sofia did not want to go to Leslie. She feared that if she refused for some reason, she would not have the opportunity to explore what was left of the house, because Leslie theoretically could begin to keep an eye on this place. That's why Sofia went to the old man's house one night, and suddenly there were children there. She had unwittingly witnessed them dabbling with vampire summoning and had luckily managed to save a girl. And then she decided to return. And again her plans were disrupted now. There were Leslie and Lucy, who had long been following the one she thought was her rival. Alexander said he met with his sister after she saved Leslie. He said he was shocked when his sister told him about her failed plans. But he also managed to change her mind. He convinced her that such a drive to get the paintings back at any cost was not normal, and it would be better to accept their loss. "That's the truth," Alexander said. "Now you know everything. My sister, she's not a bad person. I met with her and talked to her. I think I was able to convince her that the past, it's time to let it go before it goes too far. I can promise you she won't bother you again. She's going back to France tomorrow." Leslie listened to the whole story in silence, and now it was as if she had almost no questions left. But she really wanted two things: to laugh and cry at the same time. "Bunch of idiots," she said, and laughed anyway. She laughed for a long time, and then asked Steve for water because her throat was dry. "Well, I'm glad John didn't find out who your grandfather was," she sighed when she was able to speak again. "And I'm sorry that John, whatever he was, but humanly sorry for him. To be so deluded for the rest of his life. And there was no soul to help him realize that he was going mad. Well, all right, the past is indeed the past. As for your sister," and Leslie told me that no, very much of John's house was not missing. Alexander just rounded his eyes when he heard that, but Leslie did not let him say anything right away and continued. She said that if all those paintings were so important to his sister, then let her have them, for free, because she had no right to demand money for them or keep them for herself. After all, John got them, in fact, in this way. "You're an amazing woman," Alexander said. "I'm just an ordinary woman," sighed Leslie. "He's telling the truth," Steve said. "I picked up some archives. In several newspapers in the 90s really wrote about the theft of paintings from the collector. He tried to somehow find them, appealed to literally everyone who could help." "What did you get here?" Leslie frowned. "You've been unconscious for 2 days," Steve explained, and she gasped. "As for the land," said Leslie, "you know, I'm not selling anything. It's easy to sell, but John wanted to keep it all. So somehow I can do farming myself, not quite bad at it. I live in the village. There are people who will help me. A notary is a good one." "Well," sighed Alexander, "and if the land, which is already covered with forest." "Why do you need it?" Leslie asked in a businesslike tone. "I thought to build a flower farm." "You found time to talk about business." Steve was indignant. "She needs to rest." "You're right," Alexander was embarrassed. "I'll rest," Leslie yawned. "I'll take a nap now. But only let your sister come to me before she leaves for France. Is she in a hurry?" "She has a doctoral defense. She's quick, both a scientist and a thief." All right. Can you send the paintings to her afterwards? I'm not sure it will be possible. They were painted in the 19th century. Don't do anything stupid. Leslie had the strength to raise his hand and wag his finger at Alexander. I won't. In fact, I live here all the time, and I think my sister won't mind at all if the paintings just come back to me as my grandfather's direct heir. I think she'd be happy about that. Finally, Leslie got a chance to rest, and then her daughters came to visit her. Emma was serious. Selena cried and promised to always obey her mommy, and then Sophia came to see her. You? Don't tell me I'm an amazing woman. Leslie waved her hands. I can't listen to this anymore. Better, tell me, honey. How old are you? 28. I'm 37, Leslie sighed. I'm sorry if I offend you, but what an idiot you are. No, I can understand the whole situation with John. He'd definitely come at you with a stake, Leslie chuckled. But you could have come to me. I didn't know if you'd agree. If you'd allow me to look around the house, Sophia answered honestly. I realized what I did was terrible. The things I wanted to steal, I just couldn't believe I finally found them. I couldn't believe that I had finally found them. My brother already gave me a hard time. And just because I don't want to give you a hard time, Leslie sighed. But you better get your head on straight, girl, or you're gonna get in trouble one of these days. Promise? I promise. Good. Your brother wants to keep the paintings. I know, Sophia smiled. That will be enough for me. Thank you. You have given our family its history back. Leslie was not disturbed from here on out. She was treated and took lots of long rests. But Steve came every day. And then on the day Leslie was to be discharged, he unexpectedly brought her a bouquet of her favorite flowers. I'm getting a divorce, he sighed. Lucy, she's in rehab. And I don't know how much. I'm sorry, Leslie said. Now you'll be alone with your son. I'll be fine. No, you won't, she added suddenly. I'll be there for you. If you'll let me. I'd like that more than anything on Celine.
Thank you for watching this video to the end. Subscribe to the channel. Like it, write comments if you like the story, and see you on the channel.